Hey guys, today we're talking about price elasticity of demand. Our ICANN statement is I can analyze why products might have elastic or inelastic demand curves. So we're focusing completely on demand now. Just kind of set all that supply stuff in your head off to the side. And right now we're looking at price on a demand curve. So we've done this before. Think about a demand curve. It slopes downward, D for downward sloping. And we've done price equilibriums before, okay? So you draw your dotted line over and down. The x-axis is Q, the y-axis is P. And if price increases, it would go up. And we draw an arrow and label it P sub 1. And then our quantity demanded would go this way. As the opposite, if price decreased, I'm going to do it in a different color very quickly. It would go down. We'd label it P sub 2. And we'd have a new quantity over here as well. Okay, so this is the type of graph that we're looking at for the purposes of price elasticity of demand. Okay, all right. So what is price elasticity? There are two types of price elasticity, but the overall definition is a product sensitive to changes in price? If the price goes up, will people still buy it or will people not buy it? If the price goes down, will people buy more of it or will people still not really buy much of it? Okay, so elastic products, number one, and I've done a representation on a graph down here in green, means that the QD, the quantity demanded, changes a lot when price goes up or down. And the demand curve is going to be more horizontal. So let's take a look at it. Here is an original demand curve right here. Kind of what we've been learning where it's almost always at a 45-degree angle. And I know we call it a curve even though it's a straight line. We've talked about that in class before and why we do that. So here's the original demand curve. An elastic demand curve, as you can see right here, is different. It's much more shallow. It's much closer to horizontal. So when I graphed a regular price and a regular price increase on this demand curve, like our base demand curve, you see that the change in price and the change in quantity demanded were like similar. If these were numbers, if this was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this would still just be 1. This would be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the ratio would be like, 1 to 1, okay? On a very elastic product, people will change how much they buy based on the price. That means that our QD, the quantity demanded, will change a lot based on what the price of the good is. So you see I've made a price equilibrium here. Actually, let me zoom in. I did a price equilibrium here. Okay, so this was our original price. I increased the price of the good. And what happened? I get this massive gap of quantity demanded. Quantity demanded decreased a bunch. So when the price went up, people really changed how much they bought. If I did it differently, if I made the price go down, we would still have this giant gap right here. So people really change how much they buy based on the price. That means it is an elastic good. And I'll give you some examples here in a minute. The second type of graph here, I did it in orange, is an inelastic product. Okay, same graph, but you see the demand curve is a little bit different. This means that QD, quantity demanded, doesn't change much if the price goes up or down. So the price can increase or decrease drastically, but people will still buy it. So again, here's our original curve, and you see how it's kind of a 45-degree angle. Here is the curve of what an inelastic product would look like, and let me zoom in. So here's our original P and Q, our original price and quantity, okay? If I increase the price pretty significantly, this was a large chunk, what happened to the difference between the old quantity demand and the new quantity demanded? There's not a big gap here. Yes, there was a decrease, but it wasn't very much. This means that no matter where the price goes, people are going to buy this good. Let's pretend the price was down here, and we lowered it quite a bit. Hit the demand curve, go down. Here's a new Q, Q2. The difference between Q, the original Q, and the now quantity demanded still isn't much there. Even if the price goes way up or way down, people will still buy a similar amount of this good. They will buy it no matter what. We'll get to some reasons here in a second, okay? So again, here's another representation, an inelastic curve. An elastic curve is going to be much more shallow, closer to horizontal. A perfectly elastic curve, absolutely perfectly elastic, would be completely horizontal, okay? Now, an inelastic curve, as you can see, is much closer to vertical. It's not quite that 45-degree angle that we've been working with. It's much, much closer to vertical. A perfectly inelastic curve would look like this. And that would be super funky. We don't see many goods with a perfectly inelastic curve or perfectly elastic curve. We usually see goods that have, it just seems shallow or very steep types of curves, okay? So what determines what is elastic and what is inelastic, okay? Necessity, number of substitutes, and the percent of income. And there are two outcomes here. If it's necessary, it's either elastic or inelastic. If it's unnecessary, it's either elastic or inelastic. Same for substitutes and percent of income. So let's go through these individually, and I'll try and give you some examples. So if a good, when it comes to necessity, if a good is necessary, it is inelastic. And I have a little explanation over here. People will pay any price for goods that they absolutely need, okay? So think about like someone who is addicted to cigarettes, okay? Cigarettes are a necessary good for them. Or like your parents, they might drink coffee every single morning, and if they don't drink coffee, and maybe even you feel like an absolute zombie. Coffee is like a necessary good for you. So that nicotine in that cigarette, that caffeine in that coffee is very necessary. That good is inelastic. You will buy coffee no matter what, okay? That man will buy cigarettes no matter what. It is an inelastic good for him. Now let's talk about if a good is unnecessary. If an unnecessary good is elastic, I won't buy it because I don't really need it. If the price goes up, if P goes up, I'm not really going to buy that thing, okay? Let's say I really, really like fuzzy blankets, and I'm looking at Amazon for fuzzy blankets, and the one that I looked at last week but I didn't buy, the price went way up. All of a sudden, I'm going to be like, probably not going to buy that fuzzy blanket because the price went up and I don't really need it. I've got other blankets in my house, okay? So that's necessity. Let's look at the next determinant, number of substitutes, okay? Goods with lots of substitutes are elastic, and here's the reason. If the price of a good with lots of substitutes increases, I can simply buy a different brand. So think like Big Macs versus Whoppers, right? If I love Big Macs, I love Mac sauce, but they go up, like the price increases, like they're $10 now. I'm not going to buy a $10 Big Mac. I'll just go to Burger King and get a Whopper for $4, okay? So that makes that hamburger an elastic good. There's so many substitutes. Why would I buy the expensive one, okay? On the opposite end of that spectrum, goods with few substitutes are inelastic, okay? So that means that there are fewer options, and we have to buy the thing that has very few options. Let me think of a good example here. If you're in the market for a tablet, okay, you've only got a few options for a tablet. You can get like a Surface Pro or an iPad, okay? Those are kind of like your tablet options. You might be able to get like a Samsung tablet or something like that. But if you want a really, really nice tablet because you're like a digital artist or something, you're going to have to get an iPad Pro or a Surface Pro, a Microsoft Surface Pro. So those have few substitutes. So iPads are really expensive. Surface Pros are really expensive. The new iPads are like $1,500. But if I'm an artist and I need it, I need the Apple Pencil or the Surface Pro pencil or whatever, I'm going to have to pay that price because there's very few substitutes, very few tablets that do what I need to do. So that makes it inelastic, okay? And the last determinant is the percent of income. This one's the hardest to understand, so I'm going to try and give you some examples. A high percent of your income makes things more elastic, and here's the reason. You might choose not to buy a good if the change in price takes up more of your income. So think like if you are buying something pretty expensive, like my husband and I, what if we were looking at a new house? I always use the house example because it's the easiest. If we're looking at a new house and we're looking at selling our current house, $150,000 is what we're going to sell it for maybe, and we're looking at a $250,000 house, okay? Right now our mortgage payment's like, I don't know, I'm making up a number, $700 a month. And if we buy a new house, our mortgage payment is going to be like $1,500 a month. This is a large portion of our income. We're jumping up quite a bit. This price increase is changing the percent of income quite a bit. So we might not choose to buy such an expensive house because the percent of income every month, $1,500, is quite a bit of our monthly income. Okay, so there's an example of an elastic good. We might not buy such an expensive house because the jump up in price really kills our paycheck. Okay, all right. The opposite end of that spectrum, a low percent of your income makes things elastic. And the reason is if the price increases on an already cheaper good, you might still buy it because it's not using a lot of your income anyway. So think like goldfish crackers. I don't know. So here's a goldfish cracker. Yum. Wow, that's a really poor representation. I'm sorry, goldfish, the snack that smiles back. So here's our goldfish cracker. He's smiling at us. Yay. And he costs at the market, he costs like $4 a bag. I don't know. I don't even think they're that expensive. Let's say that they go up in price and it's $6 a bag. Well, I freaking love goldfish. I think they're delicious. Even though whales are better, you can't always find whales. I love goldfish. And $6, even though it's a price increase, is not much of my income. Like if I'm making however many dollars an hour, even like minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, I can spend once a week $6 on a bag of goldfish. So even though the price increased, it's still a low percent of income, a low percent of how much things really cost me. And that makes it inelastic. So I'm still probably going to buy this bag of goldfish, even though the price went up. Okay? So hopefully you understand each determinant because you're going to have to do a formative assessment on them. And we're going to be talking about these when we move on to the next part, which is total revenue. Let me look at a few more examples here of elasticity. Let's talk about gum and mints in the checkout line. Those are pretty elastic. I don't have to have gum and mints. There's lots of different substitutes. If I want icebreakers, but they go up in price, I can get Tic Tacs instead, okay? So they're very elastic. Whereas for most households, milk at the grocery aisle is pretty inelastic, right? There's very few substitutes. You can get almond milk or soy milk, but gross. You can get Walmart brand, Kroger brand, or like a name brand, but that's still very few substitutes, okay? Most families need milk. They feed their children milk to strong bones, calcium. So if the price increases of milk, you can still buy it. I remember a time when milk was $4 a gallon, and my family, when I lived with my parents, 3 kids, we drank like 2 gallons of milk a week. So that's $8 a week, but we still bought it. We still drank it. Milk was important to our family. It was necessary. Now milk is sitting about like $2.60 a gallon or somewhere around there. But even if it jumps up to like $5 or $6 a gallon, I'm still going to buy it because I drank it and my baby needs it and those sort of things, okay? All right, let's look at a not economics example. Let's look at a sports example, which y'all know I'm not the best at, but I'm trying to be relevant here. So let's talk about like fantastic athletes. Think like LeBron James, okay? He would be an inelastic product to whatever team he's on. I don't know. He would be an inelastic product. He doesn't have many substitutes. Not that many people are as good as LeBron James, okay? And I know it's like, oh, well, they buy these people for millions of dollars of contracts, and the NBA is making a huge amount of money from having these people on their teams. But sometimes these people suck. Sometimes they're gamblers. Some of them are abusive to women, and they still keep them on their team. They're hard to deal with. They don't want to practice. They talk back and curse at coaches. But they're freaking fantastic. Now, I'm not saying this of LeBron James. I know nothing about him. So even the price of dealing with their drama is worth it. He is an inelastic good. There are very few substitutes for him. He is necessary for the team. And honestly, the percent of income here, based on how much the NBA makes, they can pay him that much, okay? So there's another sports example for you. So how do we find this on a graph? Total revenue is how we find out whether a good is elastic or inelastic if the graph isn't shaped the way it's supposed to be. If the graph is still just a 45-degree angle, you can still find out if the good is elastic or inelastic using a little bit of very easy math. And we just look at the graph. It's called a total revenue graph. So here we go. Total revenue first is a formula, okay? And the formula is super easy. It's P times Q, okay? Price times quantity. So we can look at a graph and think, is this graph going to be elastic or inelastic if we know the total revenue formula? So for example, on this graph, we're not determining elasticity. I'm just teaching you the formula here. The total revenue is 100 because I took the price times the quantity. 10 times 10 is 100. So TR, we can shorthand total revenue by writing TR. TR equals 100. Okay? So now we can use total revenue to figure out if a graph is elastic or inelastic. Let's start with elastic. I have a base total revenue, equilibrium, okay? It's 10 price, 10 quantity, okay? So my equilibrium total revenue is 100, and I always have to know the equilibrium first. Then I have to know what happens if there's an increase in price or a decrease in price. And these are things that we're going to have to learn and possibly memorize, so keep this in mind. An increase in price, it is an elastic product. It is an elastic demand curve. If an increase in price leads to a decrease in total revenue. In your notes, will you shorthand that for me? An increase in price leads to a decrease in total revenue. So that means that the graph is elastic. Okay, so let's take a look at what that would mean. So here I have my equilibrium right here. Let's increase the price, and I did it in red. Let me do it over top in red for you too. Okay, so I increased the price. I went up. The price is now 12. I draw my line down, hit the demand curve, and my quantity is 8. And I will always give you these numbers. I'm not going to make you pull them out of thin air. So now I've got a new total revenue. What is 12 times 8? My new total revenue is 96. Okay? So now we have to determine, when we increased the price, what happened to total revenue? It went from 100 down to 96. So an increase in price leads to a decrease in total revenue. That means the graph is elastic. Let's do it the opposite way, okay? Let's decrease the price, leading to an increase in total revenue. So write this in shorthand, decrease in price, leading to an increase in total revenue. That would mean that the good is elastic. Let's see if I did this graph properly. Let's see if I made it elastic, right? I'm going to do it over top in green, okay? So I went from the equilibrium 10 times 10, to decrease in price. So decrease the price, I made it 8. Draw your line over and down to quantity, and I made it 13. What is 8 times 13 equals 103. So here we go. I went from 100, oh, nope, not 103, 104, Miss Killer, to 104. That was an increase in total revenue. So I decreased the price, and that led to an increase in total revenue. That means the graph is an elastic graph. Okay, so on your practice problems, you're going to see I give you equilibrium, and then I give you a new one, and I just kind of always say assume that equilibrium is 10 times 10, just so the math is really easy. And you got to see if when you increase or decrease the price, what happens to total revenue, and that will determine if it's elastic. And if the opposite happens, it's inelastic. We have to buy it no matter what. That's what inelastic means, okay? So the graph of an inelastic can be seen, inelastic good can be determined with total revenue. The following happens. Increase in price, shorthand it with me, leads to increase in total revenue, or decrease in price leads to decrease in total revenue. Okay, that's how we got to remember those. The shorthand's a lot easier to remember. So again, I made the total revenue the same, 10 times 10. I made the equilibrium total revenue the same, 10 times 10 is 100. Let's see what happens when we increase price. I'm going to do it over top in red. Let me increase the price here. I made it 12. And again, I'll always give you those numbers. Go over and down and quantity decreased to 9. So 12 times 9, price times quantity, equals 108. So what happened from my equilibrium, 10 times 10, to my new price that increased 12 times 9? From 100 to 108 was an increase. So I know that this graph is inelastic because an increase of price led to an increase in total revenue. Now let's do the opposite again. I decrease my price, made it 6, go over and down, and the quantity is 12. 6 times 12 equals 72. So what happened from my equilibrium? My equilibrium was 100. It went down to 72. That means it's inelastic. A decrease in price leads to a decrease in total revenue. All right, let's do some practice problems. So the following graphs, I haven't sloped them like they should be sloped, whether they're elastic or inelastic. You have to determine using total revenue if they are elastic or inelastic. And I always make the equilibrium 10 times 10 because that's so easy. So let's take a look at it. If I have an equilibrium of 10 times 10, my total revenue is 100. Then I increase the price. Let's increase the price to 15. Go over and down. 8. 15 times 8. I don't have my calculator out. Well, let me get my calculator out. I am pro calculator. Is 120. So what happened? When the price increased, total revenue went up from 100 to 120. And when price increases and total revenue increases, that means it is an inelastic good. Remember, we learned that over here. All right, next one. My equilibrium price is still 10 times 10, so it's 100. I lower the price to 7, go over and down. It's at 15. Remember, I'm always going to give you those numbers. So what is 7 times 15? 7 times 15 is 105. So when I decreased the price, 100 and 105 is the numbers I'm looking at. When I decreased the price, what happened? It increased total revenue. When price decreases and total revenue increases, that means the good is elastic. All right, two more. All right. Again, we're not sloped according to elasticity. You got to figure out price equilibrium is 10 times 10. It's 100. I'm going to majorly decrease the price here. Get it to 2. And the total revenue, the quantity, goes up to 25. What is 2 times 25? That is 50. My equilibrium was 100. So what happened? My total revenue went down. So my price went down and my total revenue went down. Inelastic. Last one. Here we go. I increase my price from total revenue equilibrium, 10 times 10. Way increase it. It's up to 25. Go down. And then quantity decreases to 5. So what is 25 times 5? That is 125. From my equilibrium, 100 to 125, that is an increase. So when price increased on this graph, total revenue increased. That means it is an inelastic good. All right, that's all for today. You will be doing some of these practice problems on your own later.